Youngstown, Ohio lost its soul when the steel died. It stood apart from other cities, the one that never found a replacement heart. This is the story of how America's fifth largest steel producer became a ghost town in a single day, and why nearly 50 years later, it still has not recovered. September 19th, 1977. Black Monday. 5,000 workers showed up for their shift at Youngstown Sheet and Tube's Campbell Works, only to be turned away at the gates. The company that had defined this city for over 70 years was shutting down immediately. No warning, no transition period, just the end of an era in a single announcement. Mayor Jack Hunter called it the worst possible news he could have received as a public official. But this was not just bad news for Youngstown. It was a preview of what would happen across America's industrial heartland over the next decade. Notably, this was before the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act of 1988, known as the WARN Act, which would later require companies to give advance notice of mass layoffs. To understand how devastating this moment was, you need to know what Youngstown had been. In 1930, at the height of the Great Depression, this city held 170,000 people. By the 1950s, it housed 166,000 residents, with above-average wages and one of the highest homeownership rates in the country. The steel industry was so critical here that the Soviet Union had placed Youngstown among its top targets for nuclear attack. Every night, an orange glow from the mills lit the sky. Pat Ungaro, who worked in the mills to pay for college, remembered it vividly. It was not good for the environment, but when the mills were booming, they lit up the sky. Workers set their clocks by the mill whistles. Noon meant lunch, 3 o'clock meant shift change. The rhythm of the entire city moved to the beat of steel production. But by 1977, that rhythm was already faltering. Youngstown Sheet and Tube, founded in 1900, had grown to become the fifth largest steelmaker in America by 1923. The company was the largest employer in the Mahoning Valley, the economic engine that powered everything else. But in 1969, something changed that would prove fatal. Lykes Corporation, a New Orleans shipping company 1/6 the size of Sheet and Tube, purchased the steelmaker. Justice Department investigators warned against the sale, saying the steel company would not survive. They were overruled by Attorney General John Mitchell, the same John Mitchell who would later become infamous for his role in Watergate. Lykes continued buying other companies, but crucially, they never updated Youngstown's aging open hearth furnaces. This was the fundamental problem. While Youngstown was still using outdated open hearth technology, steel mills in Germany and Japan, rebuilt from rubble after World War II, were producing better, more cost-effective steel with modern basic oxygen and electric furnaces. Every ton of steel made in Youngstown was made with equipment that was becoming obsolete. Then came Black Monday. Phil Kidd, the downtown director at the time, captured the shock. 5,000 people showed up for work one day and were turned away. But this was just the beginning. Within 5 years, a total of 50,000 jobs would disappear from the Mahoning Valley. By 1982, unemployment hit 24.9%. Nearly 1 in 4 people were out of work. The dominoes kept falling. In 1979, U.S. Steel closed the Ohio works. Then Briar Hill went down when Jones and Laughlin Steel shuttered operations. In 1984, Republic Steel was finished, and Youngstown's era of big steel was over. Pat Ungaro, who by then was on city council, watched it happen. Eventually, we tried to redevelop the land, and we had to tear the mills down. It was like losing your soul. Father Ed Noga witnessed something heartbreaking during the demolition. He saw hard men, the kind who would have a shot and a beer, standing there crying as the mills came down. These weren't just buildings being destroyed. This was the identity of an entire community being erased. There was one desperate attempt to save the mills. Stoughton Lind, a labor historian and activist, led an effort involving religious leaders and steelworkers from the Ecumenical Coalition of the Mahoning Valley to purchase and refurbish one of the abandoned plants. The idea was worker ownership, the community taking control of its own economic destiny. but they needed $200 million to $225 million to do it properly, and the federal government only had $100 million in loan guarantees available for the entire steel industry. Initially, the Carter administration seemed supportive, but after the midterm elections of 1978, facing pressure from industry lobbyists and government officials, Carter withdrew the loan guarantees. In April 1979, the worker ownership effort collapsed. It was the last real chance to save Youngstown's steel industry. The city that emerged from this collapse was unrecognizable. The population that had peaked at 170,000 in 1930 fell to just 60,068 by 2020. That's a 60% decline since the 1950s. Today, Youngstown has a median household income of just $34,746 and a poverty rate of 34.8%. The average home price is $66,086. One observer described the city as a man who is size 40, wearing a size 60 suit, a devastating image of a place left with infrastructure built for a much larger population. So why didn't Youngstown recover? Other Rust Belt cities like Pittsburgh managed to reinvent themselves by diversifying their economy around universities like Carnegie Mellon, healthcare systems like UPMC, and technology sectors. Pittsburgh transformed from steel to what economists call an IDS and meds economy, leveraging institutional anchors to build new industries. What made Youngstown different? The scale of the disaster was part of it. Urban planner Hunter Morrison explained it perfectly. These communities are very much like New Orleans. New Orleans lost half its population over a weekend. Flint, Cleveland, Youngstown, Detroit lost it over a generation. It is a major trauma to a community. It takes a long time to get over it. But there were deeper structural problems. Unlike larger industrial cities, Youngstown had failed to diversify its economic base. The city was too dependent on steel, too tied to a single industry. When that industry collapsed, there was nothing to replace it. The loss of local control also played a crucial role. When Lykes bought Youngstown Sheet and Tube, decision-making moved away from the community. Corporate leaders in New Orleans felt little responsibility to Youngstown or its workers. Local ownership might have led to different choices, more investment in modernization, or at least a more gradual transition. CBS News would later call Youngstown a symbol of the failure of American industry. The Saturday Evening Post dubbed it Crimetown, USA, as organized crime filled the vacuum left by legitimate business. The mob had always been present, but now illegal gambling became one of the few thriving enterprises in a city with few legal opportunities. Even Springsteen memorialized Youngstown's tragedy in his 1995 song Youngstown. The song mentions Jenny, the Jeanette blast furnace, whose rusting hulk still stood along the Mahoning River and was visible for miles. When Springsteen played at Stambaugh Auditorium in 1996, tickets for the 2,600-seat venue sold in record time. He was given the key to the city by Mayor Patrick Ungaro, the same Pat Ungaro who had worked in the mills and watched them be torn down. Youngstown tried to reinvent itself. In 2005, the city adopted the Youngstown 2010 plan, focusing on smart shrinkage, accepting the smaller population, and building a sustainable city around that reality. The plan received national and international attention, but a scholarly study later called it a cautionary tale. 15 years after the plan was issued, Youngstown still struggled with vacant lots, an anemic economy, and serious social challenges. In 2019, the region experienced what many called their generation's Black Monday when General Motors closed its Lordstown assembly plant, eliminating 4,352 jobs. It was history repeating itself, another major employer abandoning the region with devastating consequences. Today, there are signs of hope. The Mahoning Valley's population actually grew by 0.28% in 2024, the first increase in decades. Average hourly wages have grown from $25.23 to $26.13. The city has demolished over 7,000 vacant homes as part of an urban renewal effort. A new economic development plan targets aerospace and defense industries, and there is talk of assembling 1,000 acres for industrial development. But the fundamental question remains: Can a community truly recover from such complete economic devastation? Youngstown lost more than jobs and people. It lost its identity, its confidence, its sense of future. Nearly 50 years after Black Monday, the city is still searching for that replacement engine, that new economic heart to power its revival. Youngstown's story became America's story. The forces that destroyed the city, globalization, corporate consolidation, the decline of manufacturing, and the failure to adapt and diversify, would soon devastate communities across the Rust Belt. Youngstown was the canary in the coal mine, the first to fall, but certainly not the last. The tragedy is not just what Youngstown lost, but what America lost with it. The idea that hard work in manufacturing could build a middle-class life, that communities could control their own economic destinies, that prosperity was something you could count on lasting. Youngstown did not just lose its mills, it lost the American dream itself. And 50 years later, we are still trying to figure out how to build it back.